Hey y'all, welcome back to BrowTab BSchool. Today I'm coming to you live from my studio space. I'll give you a little spin of it. But we're here today because we're moving back to talking about BrowTab products from last week when we talked about BSchool, and we are specifically talking about pigment ring cups today. So I figured why not do it from the studio so I can show you guys a little bit of action. If you haven't tried out the BrowTab No Spill ring cups, I'm here to explain to you exactly how to use them because they are a little bit different than your average ring cups that a lot of times just look like these little white plastic things here. I'm going to explain what makes them great, and part of it is this little sponge right in here. If you've ever spilled pigment on yourself, on your setup, on your client, trust me, I've done that. These are going to save you. If you're new to the channel, I'm Alex. I'm the girl behind BrowTab, the brand, the products, the online education, and this YouTube channel. So like I said, today I'm coming to you live from my studio. If you hear any background noise, please excuse the raw footage. BrowTab specializes in ultra nano microblades, I like to say sharp AF, and online education to help you grow your brow. Today, like I said, we are going to be talking about pigment ring cups, specifically the BrowTab No Spill ring cups. They're called that for a reason, but sometimes they're just called a sponge in ring cups. I am coming to you live from my studio space today so that I can show you how to actually use this. So if there's any extra noise that you're catching up, please excuse it from today because there's lots of other girls in the studio working. So there are a few benefits to using these no spill ring cups. One of them comes right in the name, the no spill. You're no longer going to be spilling your pigment on yourself, on your setup, or even on your client. It's okay if you've done it. I've done it too, but we don't have to do it again. With these ring cups, we can save the fear, the mess of spilling. The sponge is really what saves. So how does it work? Well, the sponge does what a sponge is meant to do, and it absorbs the excess pigment. So it's not sloshing around in an empty cup like it would be in these kind of old style plastic ring cups. The sponge absorbs the pigment, and then when you press down on the sponge with your blade, it gives off just the perfect amount of pigment for you to make a super clean stroke. So how do you use it? How do you save yourself from spilling? I'm gonna show you. So remove the ring cup from the packaging. The great thing is they come individually wrapped. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to make sure you remove the sponge before you put pigment in the cup, because if you put pigment in the cup before removing the sponge, you're just going to make a bigger mess. So take the sponge out first. So use a micro swab. If you remember from our 5 underrated microblading tools, this one is my favorite. It has the most uses. So take one of your micro swabs. You can get these on the BrowTab store. Use the back end of it and just kind of scoop your sponge out of the cup, but save the sponge, don't throw it away. So your next step is to pour your pigment into your ring cup. I put gloves on for this step, but normally you'd be gloved up already because you'd be working on your client. And don't worry, I'm going to show you a quick step-by-step of how to do this after. So we make sure we shake our pigment really well, right? Always for at least 30 seconds. And then we are going to put it in our ring cup. So fill it up. And now, so it's not sloshing around, making a mess, potentially spilling, we take our sponge that we set aside and we put it back in. And then we take my favorite micro swab and we just push it right back into the pigment so that it fully absorbs. You may have to push it down once or twice. See? Little side note, if you were going to mix more than one shade of pigment or you were going to add some modifiers, make sure you do that before you put your sponge back in. So put your target color in, put your modifier or your mixture shade, mix it really, really well. I always just use my micro swab to do that, and then put your sponge in. So that's it. You have a sponge in pigment cup full of pigment ready for you to use. No pigment sloshing around to make a mess and spill on your client. So that is the no spill ring cup. So let's open up our ring cup. Now we're gonna take out the sponge save it for after, and shake our pigment real well. Pour it into the ring cup, and remember, if you're gonna add any modifiers or mix any shades, you're gonna do this now too. Fill it up real good, and then to make sure that it doesn't spill, I'm gonna put our sponge back in. So just place it in there, and then take your micro swab again and push it down once, twice, 3 times, 4 times until it absorbs all the pigment. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that there are multiple benefits of these ring cups, and there are 4, and I got you. I'm gonna share them with you. So benefit number 1 is obvious. No spill. We just went over that. Benefit number 2 is not hitting or dulling your blade on the bottom of the cup. So we are supposed to move slow and be very careful when we are microblading, but sometimes we move a little faster than planned. So when you're dipping your blade in your cup, you have the cushion of the sponge to touch your blade in to pick up your pigment. You're not hitting it in the ring cup like you would in a more shallow ring cup with no sponge. You could just hit the edge and you can dull, break, bend your blade, and we never want to use a blade like that on our clients. We would have to switch out the blade. This saves you. The key with this is to never drag your blade in the sponge. That can dull it, and that can be an old habit from wiping it on the edges of using other ring cups. So make sure you are always bouncing it really lightly on the sponge. That way you'll never dull your blade. So benefit number 3 is that the sponge lets us get the perfect amount of pigment on the blade so that we're not getting too much pigment. Too much pigment on the blade doesn't allow us to actually see the blade when we're making our strokes. So we won't get as crisp, as perfect, as precise placement of our strokes as we would when we can see our blade. So we only want the smallest amount of pigment. So when we dip, and we dip with the sponge, we have a lot more control of how much pigment we're getting. And you can see how little pigment we actually want on the blade, because we can completely see the blade and where our stroke is going to go. Also look at how much pigment you want to get on your blade and dipping, bouncing your blade on the sponge. I am going to show you. So make sure you're always just lightly bouncing your pigment. You're never wiping. You always want to be lightly bouncing. So I bounced it on there about 3 times, which got us exactly the right amount of pigment. The tiniest amount, because we want to be able to see our blade when we're making that stroke, and we don't want to get too much pigment on the skin next to our stroke so we can't see where our next one goes. Finally, benefit number 4 is that these ring cups are double duty. They come apart. So you don't have to purchase ring cups and little cups for any other liquids that you use during your service. You can just take these apart and use just the cup. So I like to use just the cup part. I take the sponge out for this. Once again, with your little micro swab, and I will fill this with a secondary numbing, with witch hazel, with any other liquids that I use during the procedure. That's all for ring cups, y'all. Use these ring cups to never spill on your clients again, not dull your blade, and get the crispest, cleanest strokes. Please leave me a thumbs up today, and if you want to see more videos like this, microblading tips, tricks, and education, as well as business education to grow your brow business, subscribe now.